Chosen one, can you feel it? That sudden shift in the air, that undeniable sense that what was hidden is no longer protected. The walls that once shielded their lies are crumbling. You were never crazy. You were never overreacting. You were simply ahead of the evidence. And now, the evidence has arrived like a tidal wave, unstoppable, divine, and drenched in holy vindication. The very ones who laughed behind closed doors, your ex, that manipulative lawyer, and the corrupt cop they conspired with, once moved like shadows, confident that no one would ever connect the dots. But heaven has a memory, and it has finally answered. Their secrets are no longer secrets. Their schemes are no longer safe. The cover-up is unraveling in real time, and guess who's still standing? Comment 777. If you've ever been gaslit by a narrative you knew was false, if you've ever carried the truth in silence because the world wasn't ready to hear it, your moment has come. And to those of you who have supported this channel through super thanks, your faith has helped keep the flame of truth alive. Thank you, from the depths of a healed but once broken soul. So now the question must be asked. What happens when the whole town sees what you always knew? How do they explain the evidence you were never meant to find? And why are they suddenly so quiet, so shaken, so exposed? Keep watching, because what's coming next will not just vindicate your name. It will rewrite the entire narrative. God's chosen ones, ex-lover, dirty lawyers, and cops covered up the truth, but it's finally exposed. Where once your voice was drowned in dismissal and your truth met with cold stares, now an unstoppable wave of righteous fury is building. What once was denial has become exposure. What was gaslighting has become reckoning. And you, God's chosen one, stand not as a victim, but as the catalyst. The veil of secrecy is not merely lifting. It has been torn open like the curtain of the temple in Matthew 27:51. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. That same divine disruption is shaking the ground beneath the feet of your accusers. How did so many fail to see through the performance? Why did they celebrate your downfall instead of questioning the story? Were they blind or just comfortable in the lie? Now they witness the slow collapse of the lie they defended. Every performance, every fake apology, every weaponized story is now played back in crystal clarity. Screenshots, recordings, deleted files recovered, money trails exposed. And as the dots connect, silence spreads, heavier than judgment. Your ex, the manipulator, their lawyer, the strategist of deceit, and the officer, a corrupted arm of power, each of them now stripped bare before a public that once praised them. Your ex wasn't merely reactive, they were strategic, turning minor misunderstandings into loaded traps. Like an engineer of emotional sabotage, they laid each brick of betrayal with precision. They practiced what behavioral psychology calls perception framing, shaping others' view of you through curated emotional displays and manipulated context. Each outburst, a misdirection, each tear, a weapon. The lawyer they enlisted turned courtrooms into arenas of illusion. Familiar with legal pathways, they bypassed justice by bending statutes into weapons of confusion. They forged documents with surgical skill, erased key phrases, inserted ambiguities. They used what cognitive linguists call semantic overload, burying judges and jurors in jargon until the truth drowned beneath complexity. They wore suits of honor while constructing walls of lies. The officer betrayed the very code of their badge, not through blatant tyranny, but subtle dismantling of justice. Surveillance tapes vanished, dates were altered, witnesses silenced through gentle suggestion. They didn't break the law, they twisted it just enough to fit their version of events. Isn't that how corruption thrives? Not by shouting in darkness, but by whispering in daylight. Just as the Apostle Paul was once Saul, zealous in persecuting the innocent until God blinded him and rerouted his calling, this moment is your Damascus. Those who accused you are being struck with the same blinding light of revelation. Their sight may return, but their status never will. And while some who once sided with them now offer hesitant apologies, you are not obligated to carry their guilt. Can sorrow undo the months you were made to feel insane? Can silence rebuild what doubt destroyed? Even their allies have begun to back away. Emails, voice memos, private group chats. Every shadowy whisper is now bathed in truth's relentless sunlight. What was once invisible is now archived, labeled undeniable. Angela Arendt's, former CEO of Burberry and executive at Apple, once said, "Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching." But what happens when you finally shine light on those who did everything wrong because they thought no one was watching? The world watches now, and not all infamous figures are born in headlines. Joseph James D'Angelo, known as the Golden State Killer, lived decades in peaceful disguise, serving as a cop, raising a family, while hiding the horrors he'd committed. When truth finally exposed him, the mask didn't just fall, it disintegrated. His neighbors, once defenders, became his judges. The courtroom was silent, not because of awe, but because of betrayal. That's the cost of deception. And while you may not see yourself as a hero, others do. Like Luis, a custodian who worked 18 years at a public school and was falsely accused of theft by the principal and assistant superintendent. His quiet integrity, however, won out. Surveillance footage proved his innocence and revealed that the real thief was the same principal who signed the report. Luis didn't raise his voice, but truth raised his platform. Even the wild teaches this pattern. The octopus, often underestimated in the predator hierarchy, can reconfigure its shape, color, and texture in milliseconds, not just for defense but for mastery. In its silence and camouflage lies its advantage. But when exposed, it's a revelation to those who assumed dominance meant noise. So too, your silence was never weakness. It was strategy. And now you've emerged in divine clarity, fluid, ungraspable, unbound. Could they really have believed this would never come to light? Were they so deluded that they assumed heaven wouldn't intervene? How long did they think encrypted messages could stay hidden? What kind of person weaponizes love, law, and justice in one sweep? What happens when the foundation of a lie meets the earthquake of divine truth? What do people do when the person they discarded turns out to be God's vessel of revelation? This is more than vindication. This is divine reversal. Just like Joseph, sold by his brothers into slavery, falsely imprisoned, and yet lifted to power by God to save the very ones who betrayed him. Genesis 45. You, too, were buried under falsehood. But what they meant for evil, God is turning for good. You once watched the system twist itself into a serpent to strangle your truth. But now that same system coils back, this time to strike its original masters. It moves not with hesitation, but with the inevitability of divine timing. God has reconfigured the very architecture of power. What once closed against you now opens with fire. What once erased you now reintroduces you, this time not as the accused, but as the vessel of justice. You, God's chosen one, were never abandoned. Heaven simply allowed time to ferment the truth into something undeniable. And now, a new generation of officials, untouched by the corruption of your past, step into the arena. They do not arrive with bias, but with blueprints of righteousness. Have you ever seen a structure collapse from within? That is what is unfolding now, not by force but by resonance. Truth, like a perfectly tuned frequency, is vibrating through every institution they once weaponized. Files once marked as closed are reopened with reverence and focus. Long-deleted evidence surfaces, hard drives decrypted, receipts recovered, emails restored. Is it coincidence? Or is it, as Esther 4:14 reminds us, perhaps you were born for such a time as this? And so was your vindication? One by one, those who were once silent step forward, their voices no longer trembling, but rising like a crescendo. A woman once afraid to speak now presents a recording. A man who vanished from the city returns with documents. They arrive like rainfall on parched land, unavoidable, cleansing and prophetic. What had been buried in fear now blooms in courage, and subpoenas thunder across the city like divine arrows. The papers land on desks and doorsteps like scrolls of judgment. Your ex, once smug in their safety, receives theirs with hands that can no longer fake steadiness. The lawyer, who thought the courtroom was their kingdom, now sees their name, centered, bold, unmistakable, on a court summons. The same law they distorted now becomes the blade that slices through their charade. Do you see how the spoken word has become a sword? Judges who once rubber-stamped every shady motion now reread each file with reluctant dread. Prosecutors, previously passive, now circle like hawks. Even defense attorneys who once smiled in their company now flee like rats from a sinking ship. No one wants to be tethered to a collapsing lie. And the badge, once their shield, it now burns in judgment. Internal affairs has arrived, not as a whisper, but as a force. Offices raided, laptops imaged, phone logs dissected, every breadcrumb of betrayal traced with forensic precision. What they built on secrecy is now being deconstructed by scrutiny, and scrutiny, unlike silence, cannot be bribed. Even the financial systems, the so-called silent accomplices, have turned. Banking regulators, accountants and fraud specialists now trace every wire transfer, offshore deposit and shell company name. Their fraud wasn't just moral, it was fiscal. And now the tax authorities weave together the tapestry of their deception. Unreported income, falsified audits and suspicious donations. What once appeared as wealth now registers as a liability. Do you remember how Pharaoh thought he could keep Israel enslaved forever, until God himself stepped into the story and every structure of oppression crumbled? Exodus 12. You too are watching an Exodus moment unfold. But instead of parting waters, it is parted lies. Instead of a Red Sea, it is a sea of evidence. Brian Stevenson, a human rights lawyer and founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, once said, "The opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice." And now justice is moving not as a suggestion, but as a sentence. It is active. It is alive. It is holy. The unraveling has also reached into corners they never thought would betray them. Like Detective Raul Moreno, a real-life cop once honored for integrity, who turned on his former partner after discovering internal corruption. It was his testimony that led to the dismantling of a precinct-wide cover-up. The fallout was historic, but the cleansing was necessary. And in the quiet world of ordinary people, Dana, a paralegal who once processed forged documents for that corrupt lawyer, came forward. She risked her job, reputation, even her safety, because the weight of complicity crushed her conscience. Her affidavit became the linchpin of a case that many thought unsalvageable. She didn't wear a cape, she wore her truth. And in nature there is a force that mirrors your vindication. Lava tubes. Hidden beneath hardened earth, rivers of molten fire flow silently for years. No one sees them, but one tremor, one shift, and they erupt. The same ground that once appeared calm becomes a force of reckoning. So it is with you. Your truth flowed beneath the surface, and now the tremor has come. What happens when the evidence you needed now walks toward you? What do they do when their former allies testify against them? How do they defend against a justice system they no longer control? What happens when the badge turns its back? When the laws they manipulated rise to rebuke them? Can lies stand in a storm this orchestrated? Can the truth really stay buried when heaven itself starts unearthing it? For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8:17. That's not just a verse, it's a prophecy fulfilled in real time. You're watching this verse walk into courtrooms, into inboxes, into recorded testimonies. This is not just karma, this is kingdom justice. This is what happens when heaven advocates on behalf of one of its own. You are now living in the hour of exposure, where performance collapses and truth pierces every illusion. Every mask once used to charm, deflect and deceive is now in freefall. The elaborate personas they constructed like stage sets are not just cracking, they're crumbling into dust. You, God's chosen one, no longer need to defend what the evidence is now shouting. What once demanded your tears now demands their accountability. What do people do when the narrative they defended begins to bleed? What happens when your silence becomes their sentence? How long can a lie survive in the oxygen of unveiled truth? Every moment that once felt like emotional whiplash, those charming smiles turned accusations, the crocodile tears at just the right time, the sudden bursts of false vulnerability are now proven to be intentional. It wasn't confusion, it wasn't miscommunication. It was a weaponized art form of emotional manipulation rooted in performance psychology and gaslighting theory. You were not imagining it, you were enduring it. And now, that endurance is backed by evidence. Their private messages are no longer private. Their strategy is no longer veiled. In one thread with the lawyer, you're labeled a threat to neutralize, not a person to understand. In another, with the crooked officer, they casually discuss illegal surveillance like weekend plans. And perhaps most chilling of all, discussions about financial assets, your assets, reduced to cold numbers, divided like war spoils between conspirators. There was never love there was leverage. You were never in a relationship. You were a resource. And now that the illusion has shattered, even their closest allies are stunned into silence. Friends who once echoed their stories now step away. Family members who swore by their character begin to remember inconsistencies. Former colleagues no longer meet their eyes. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Do you remember Judas's kiss in Gethsemane? Luke 22:48. It wasn't the kiss that wounded. It was the betrayal behind it. You were kissed with lies, embraced by intentions designed to drain you. And now, the betrayal is public, undeniable, unspinnable. Brian Stevenson, renowned civil rights lawyer, said, "Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. But what about those whose worst was systematic, prolonged and planned? What about those who made a career from cruelty?" Their panic now shows in every move. Conflicting statements to different people, lies that begin to contradict earlier lies, interviews that fall apart under expert scrutiny. Every attempt at public redemption only accelerates their descent. Legal experts now analyze their words frame by frame, showing how even their apologies are evidence. The more they speak, the more the rot is revealed. And that rot is not new, it's generational, it has roots. The fruit of corruption did not grow in isolation. It came from soil tainted by a family system that normalized manipulation, deception, and dominance. Parents who trained them to prioritize image over integrity. Siblings who tracked your every step, feeding back information like spies in a house of mirrors. Aunts, uncles, cousins, some silent, some paid to stay that way. Now every member who touched the scheme is facing scrutiny. The family had always called you different, too sensitive, too intuitive, too strong. But the truth is, you were too awake. You disrupted their ecosystem of control. That's why they tried to erase you, because your presence exposed the mold they called tradition. Financially, the scheme was more intricate than even you imagined. Shared properties, fake inheritances, fabricated salaries in fake companies run by relatives. But now, forensic accountants trained in tracing offshore webs are dismantling it all. What was once hidden in false business ledgers is now clear in high-resolution audits. And like Proverbs 13:11 declares, wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. The money they built through deceit is dissolving. The empires forged in fraud are melting like wax. Gloria, a mid-level HR director who'd long suspected her sister's sudden wealth was tied to corruption, finally stepped forward. Her report to the Financial Crimes Unit triggered a chain of audits. In one folder, she found payroll records for employees who didn't exist, including a paycheck issued in your name months after you'd left the company. She didn't seek drama. She sought justice, and now her bravery is part of your redemption. Even the natural world reveals this pattern. The timber rattlesnake, long underestimated, emits a quiet rattle before it strikes, not out of fear but warning. But when pushed too far, it sheds the warning and delivers fatal precision. You gave the warning. Now justice strikes, not out of vengeance, but out of alignment. Were they so convinced that power made them untouchable? Did they believe generational wealth was the same as divine favor? How long did they think manipulation could pass for love? Why did they assume your silence meant weakness? How did they mistake your patience for permission? And what happens now when even the system they rigged begins to echo your name? This is not just revelation. This is retribution. And it's not man-made. It's orchestrated from heaven. Under the crushing weight of exposure, the same family that once stood in cold agreement now begins to fracture like ice under heat. Memories once sharp become suddenly foggy. Conversations that were crystal clear when weaponized against you are now misremembered. Some relatives rush to reposition themselves, not as perpetrators, but as casualties. They scramble to rewrite their roles in the narrative, hoping proximity to your pain can shield them from accountability. But heaven is not accepting rewrites. The script is sealed. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Ephesians 5:11. That scripture is no longer theory. It's your reality. You are the living fulfillment of that command, and their shadows are shrinking under your light. What happens when generational protection becomes generational prosecution? How long can secrets remain sacred when they are soaked in injustice? Can a name be honorable if it is built on another's silence? The illusion of family unity was always fragile, held together by manipulation, fear, and image management. Now the cracks are not just visible, they are audible. Whispered calls, nervous texts, discreet meetings with investigators. A few elders, sensing the end of their influence approaching, make quiet deals. I don't want to carry this to my grave, one confesses. They finally surrender documents hidden in closets, letters tucked in attic boxes, receipts folded into Bibles like bookmarks of guilt. They aren't just defending against the law now, they're confronting eternity. And in this holy unveiling, it becomes clear their assault wasn't merely legal or emotional. It was spiritual warfare dressed in family dinners, false forgiveness, and passive-aggressive prayers. They weren't just after your reputation, they targeted your perception. They engineered what neuropsychologists call reality fragmentation, gaslighting that disrupts cognitive coherence. Every time they questioned your memory, denied your experience, or told you you were too sensitive, they were manipulating the neurological compass that anchored you to truth. But what they couldn't extinguish was your discernment. You weren't just intuitive, you were spiritually equipped. Like Daniel in Babylon, you had insight they couldn't explain, an ability to read the writing on the wall before others even noticed the wall, Daniel 5. Your capacity to perceive deception wasn't paranoia, it was prophecy, and that made you dangerous. Brené Brown, professor and researcher on vulnerability, once said, "The truth is uncomfortable, but the only thing more uncomfortable is not telling it." Your discomfort was never weakness. It was the cost of carrying truth in a family that feared it. But not everyone feared. Javier, your cousin who once stayed silent, began to review old financial records after overhearing a late-night argument. What he found, a trail of falsified medical bills submitted in your name to an insurance fraud ring run by two uncles, shattered him. It took months, but he stepped forward. His affidavit, unexpected and precise, added another undeniable layer to the growing mountain of evidence. His courage proved that not all bloodlines carry the same code. And still deeper than fear was envy. They saw your energy like light through a prism, too varied, too brilliant, too holy to control. So they did what weak spirits always do. They tried to drain you, financially, emotionally, spiritually. You became the scapegoat for dysfunction they refused to confront, the emotional sponge for their guilt, the mirror they tried to break because it reflected too much truth. Even when the lies surrounded you like fog on the moor, your inner compass never broke. You doubted, yes. You cried, absolutely. But your flame, however faint, never died. Like a deep-sea anglerfish who navigates pitch-black depths with a bioluminescent glow from within, you guided yourself through deception when no external light was available. They underestimated the luminescence of your resilience. Was it mere chance that your spirit survived when others collapsed? Was it luck that you sensed what others ignored? Why did they fight so hard to convince you of a lie, unless they feared the power of your truth? Who taught them to manipulate so thoroughly, unless someone had modeled that poison first? And why did your presence provoke such discomfort, unless it threatened the system that fed them? Even in your most exhausted state, heaven refused to let your truth disappear. You were surrounded by distortion, but protected by frequency. The Holy Spirit operated like sonar, vibrating divine truth through the waters of chaos, echoing back with direction when all you could do was feel. And now you stand in the moment Paul described in Galatians 6:9. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. This is your season, not of survival, but of sacred harvest. Quick pause, family. If your spirit is vibrating in agreement with this message, if something deep inside you is being stirred, this is your confirmation. You're not imagining it. This is real. This is prophetic. And if you feel led to support this sacred mission of unmasking, healing, and divine truth-telling, your seed helps sustain a space where light breaks lies and heaven speaks. And if you're feeling this word, drop 88 in the comments. It's the number of new beginnings doubled. And today, your breakthrough is not just coming, it's being documented. Now, let's go deeper. The paper trail they tried to hide is now becoming the scaffold of their downfall. Bank logs, property deeds, and tax returns, once crafted with quiet arrogance, are now in open view. What they counted on being buried under bureaucracy is now being resurrected by expert hands. The very systems they corrupted are testifying against them. What happens when their own fingerprints become the evidence? How do you hide a crime when the ledger itself speaks? What if every transaction is a sentence in the story of their undoing? Financial forensic teams now move like surgeons, unpeeling layers of deception with precise tools. They trace unusual transfers made at hours that didn't align, large deposits just before court hearings, asset titles moved between family members, offshore entities that appear just long enough to intercept your inheritance, then disappear. But, like Proverbs 10:9 declares, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. That time has come. Your ex's lawyer wasn't sloppy. They were surgical. They knew exactly how to falsify without leaving fingerprints. Until now. Signatures extracted under emotional duress. Deadlines manipulated so oversight wouldn't catch the switch. Legal filings dressed as routine but laced with deceptive language, coded to benefit the wrong party. They relied on what architecture calls structural camouflage, designing frameworks that look strong from the outside but collapse under true weight. And now the pressure is finally on. Every innocent error they once blamed on clerical mistakes is exposed as calculated sabotage. Nothing about this was accidental. It was premeditated fraud presented as formality. The corrupt officer made sure investigations never reached ignition. They didn't just delay, they dismantled. Surveillance footage lost. Witnesses intimidated under the guise of protocol. Leads intentionally diverted like rivers rerouted through artificial dams. But like all unnatural engineering, the truth has found cracks. And now, experts trained in following financial trails, auditors, compliance attorneys, intelligence analysts, are pulling back every layer. One-use accounts created for hush payments, cash used to disrupt digital trails, properties passed between third parties in circular patterns designed to confuse jurisdiction. Their whole empire of illusion is unraveling. Eli Honig, former federal prosecutor, once said, "The cover-up is often more damaging than the crime itself." And that is what's happening now. The deception has become the noose. Even those who once stood at the edges of the conspiracy, co-workers, friends, distant relatives, can no longer sleep soundly. Their hands may not have drawn the blueprints, but they helped carry the bricks. And now, with headlines emerging and subpoenas increasing, they begin to whisper their doubts. A few begin to talk. One voice becomes two, and suddenly silence is no longer safe. Maya, an assistant to the tax attorney who helped obscure assets, begins to notice inconsistencies in the files. She finds an unfiled copy of a transfer deed in your name. Something in her conscience awakens. Her testimony becomes the key that opens an entire new thread of inquiry. She doesn't seek fame, she seeks freedom from guilt. What if she had stayed silent? What if no one came forward? What if you had accepted the loss as final? What happens now that the lie is collapsing in real time? Can stolen legacy withstand divine pursuit? Can money wash away what was rooted in malice? In nature, the mantis shrimp, a small but extraordinary creature, can see polarized light invisible to the human eye. It detects patterns that predators cannot hide, perceiving threats embedded in illusion. You, like the mantis shrimp, were made to see beneath surfaces, and now what you sensed intuitively is being confirmed materially. So stand firm. The evidence that was once hidden is not just appearing, it is crying out. Heaven is making sure the ledger speaks, and this time, no hand can erase your name from what is rightfully yours. The badge, once worn with pride, now feels like an iron collar. And what of the extended family who enabled it all? 2 relatives who received gifts from shell companies are being audited. One quietly sells property to cover legal fees. Another deletes social media entirely. Their names, once linked to prestige, now trend alongside words like fraud, embezzlement, and cover-up. Their social capital burns like dry grass under a magnifying glass of scrutiny. And Maya, the assistant who came forward, watches all this unfold from a distance. She is safe, protected, redeemed. Her courage marked her apart from the rest. Where they are falling, she is rising. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Isaiah 5:20. This isn't just justice, it is divine correction. The line they blurred has now become a sword. The law moves slowly, but when heaven accelerates timing, even the slowest wheels of justice begin to spin like thunder. You always knew that you weren't crazy, you were early. The patterns you saw, the silences you felt, the glances exchanged behind your back, They weren't imagination. They were signals, warnings, clues. And now, the walls that once gaslit you into questioning your own discernment are beginning to crack. Not because you shouted louder, but because others finally started whispering the same truth. First, there's the legal assistant, quiet, methodical, afraid. She'd noticed irregularities for years, documents signed out of sequence, folders replaced too quickly, entire files missing after hallway conversations, but fear kept her quiet. Fear of being ostracized, fear of losing her job, fear of being labeled emotional or unstable, just as they labeled you. But now she speaks. She sends an encrypted file to an independent investigator. She forwards time-stamped emails. She holds the line. Then comes the junior officer, young, disillusioned, watching procedure after procedure violated without accountability. He had seen evidence discarded before logging, witnesses redirected mid-testimony, internal reports subtly rewritten by supervisors. At the time he buried it, trauma response. But now something shifts. Courage is contagious. He logs a formal report. He keeps copies. He names names. Even your ex's friend, the one who had dismissed you with a half smile and averted eyes, finds themselves haunted by scenes they once ignored. They remember overheard calls, deleted voice memos, statements that never sat right. They begin drafting an affidavit. Truth has begun to thaw the silence. What happens when a single voice becomes a symphony? What happens when the smallest confession opens the biggest door? How long can darkness survive when even the quiet ones begin to carry torches? These whistleblowers, once paralyzed by fear, now become the heartbeat of revelation. They approach with caution at first. Anonymous tips, untraceable calls, USBs slid into secure hands. They preserved screenshots when told to clear their devices. They kept voice recordings hidden behind password layers. Some even jotted notes on napkins and receipts, because something inside refused to let the truth die quietly. And then, the threshold is crossed. A particularly trusted insider, someone close enough to the inner sanctum to be included in planning, strategy, and celebration, finally breaks. They had watched you be destroyed in real time, and guilt became unbearable. This person, their identity sealed under protection, had preserved everything. Email chains, recorded Zoom calls, handwritten instructions, even paper trails meant to be burned. And with one carefully delivered archive, they provide the skeleton key that unlocks the vault, and everything changes. What started as drops of truth becomes a flood. As more revelations surface, those who once feared becoming the only one realize they're not alone. There's safety in alignment, strength in collective memory, courage in confirmation. The floodgates break. In psychology, this is called a systemic tipping point, the moment when exponential change becomes inevitable. And that's what's happening now. Like a fault line shifting under tectonic pressure, truth is erupting, not gradually, but violently, unstoppably. Frances Haugen, the whistleblower who exposed Facebook's internal harms, once said, "Until incentives change, Facebook will not change." But you are now witnessing what happens when the incentive becomes righteousness, when people choose eternity over endorsement. And once the shift begins, it cannot be reversed. Even the most hardened system cannot withstand universal corroboration. The conspiracy collapses under its own weight. Like a black hole reaching critical mass, it implodes, not in silence but in public shame. Mark Ciavarella, once a respected judge in Pennsylvania, is living proof of what happens when legal robes are used to disguise personal profit. He orchestrated what would later be exposed as the infamous Kids for Cash scandal, where he accepted millions in kickbacks from for-profit juvenile detention centers in exchange for sentencing thousands of minors, many for minor infractions. On the surface, he ruled with authority, but behind closed doors, he traded justice for greed. In 2011, he was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. His courtroom, once a symbol of law, became the stage of one of the most grotesque betrayals of public trust in American judicial history. And his legacy, forever stained. His name, once spoken with respect, is now synonymous with systemic evil exposed. Meanwhile, Nia, a young graduate intern who had always believed in justice, quietly uploads a folder to the investigative task force. Her digital evidence, casually collected, innocently stored, contains proof of altered timestamps that only someone at her clearance level could have noticed. She doesn't speak publicly, but her folder breaks a chain of command that had protected the guilty for years. Have you ever seen a dam break in slow motion? Water pressure mounts for days, cracks appear like veins on concrete, a whisper becomes a roar, and then, suddenly, nothing can hold it back. That's what's happening now. The flood of truth is no longer asking permission. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all who wait for him. Isaiah 30:18. And now you're no longer waiting, you're watching it unfold. As the storm of truth intensifies, the once unbreakable alliance between your adversaries begins to fracture, precisely as you sensed it would. The walls they built to imprison you are now closing in on them, and their unity begins to unravel under pressure like fabric strained past its tensile limit. Where they once spoke in lockstep, now they contradict, deflect, and betray. And in their unraveling, the depth of their guilt is revealed. Your ex, who orchestrated much of the damage, suddenly casts themselves as the true victim. They say they were misled, manipulated, that the lawyer exploited their emotional state, that they were grieving, confused. They claim they never truly understood the implications. But the timelines don't lie. Their signatures sit on too many forms. Their voice echoes in too many recordings. What kind of innocence requires that much destruction to defend it? The lawyer, cornered by mounting evidence, pivots to protect themselves. I was just following client instructions, they insist. Attorney-client privilege prevents me from revealing more. But investigators know better. They've seen the emails, the missing documents, the altered timestamps, and they've studied the legal loopholes designed not for clarity, but concealment. The corrupt officer? They blame the system itself. They cite culture, chain of command, unspoken expectations. Their statements drip with victimhood and vague appeals to departmental dysfunction. But they were not powerless. They were participants. And now, even that shield of systemic anonymity is being pierced. Their panic is no longer subtle. Deleted threads, documents shredded, computer malfunctions that conveniently erase data from key dates. In some homes, literal fires erupt in file drawers, too perfectly timed to be coincidence. But investigators recognize this behavior for what it is: consciousness of guilt. In criminal psychology, it's called preemptive sabotage, the destruction of evidence not just to conceal, but to confess without admitting. Ironically, the very attempts to cover their tracks become markers, a roadmap. Every gap points to a secret. Every deleted message raises a new question. The paperless trail speaks louder than paper ever did. Their unity evaporates like morning mist under judgment's sun. What was once a coordinated machine of deceit now splinters into rival tribes. Immunity deals are whispered behind closed doors. The ex offers incriminating emails. The lawyer provides details on financial transfers. The officer volunteers secrets about who gave the go-ahead and when. Self-preservation becomes their only doctrine. They have become exactly what they feared: alone. In legal history, few cases illustrate this unraveling better than Jeffrey Skilling, former CEO of Enron. Once at the helm of one of America's largest companies, Skilling oversaw a massive fraud scheme that led to the collapse of Enron and the loss of billions in pensions and savings. As the walls closed in, executives turned on one another, trading testimony to save themselves. Unity became an illusion. Skilling was sentenced to 24 years in prison, and his legacy now stands as a monument to corporate betrayal and ego-driven collapse. But in contrast, Ben Ferenc, the last living Nuremberg prosecutor before his passing, spent his entire life pursuing justice, quietly, diligently, faithfully. His famous quote echoes through this moment: "Law, not war. Truth, not terror. Justice, not revenge." You now stand on that same battlefield, and justice, not revenge, is finally speaking. Meanwhile, Kara, a former payroll technician who once processed suspicious payments under pressure, decides to break the silence. She forwards internal memos she was instructed to discard. Her simple act, born from late-night conviction, brings clarity to one of the most complex financial loops in the case. She may never testify on a stage, but her document becomes a turning point. Nature holds a mirror to what's unfolding. The cicada killer wasp, known for capturing prey and burying it alive to feed its young, eventually forgets where it buried the bodies. Its instinct served a selfish purpose, but even nature enforces consequence. You can only bury the truth for so long before what you thought was forgotten begins to rot, rising to the surface with a stench no excuse can cover. And when everything they built to hide their sin becomes the very evidence of it, what then? Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. Galatians 6:7. And now the harvest has arrived. They planted manipulation and are reaping exposure. They sowed control and are harvesting chaos. Their desperate efforts to rewrite the past are not only unconvincing, they are embarrassing. What once masqueraded as control now reeks of collapse. They stumble through awkward justifications, claiming confusion where there was coordination, misunderstanding where there was manipulation, oversight where there was orchestration. Their lies bend under scrutiny like metal under stress, each excuse more laughable than the last. He who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous are both alike an abomination to the Lord. Proverbs 17:15. And that's what they did, justified the wicked, condemned the righteous. But heaven has reversed the verdict. What happens when the only defense left is denial? How long can anyone pretend when evidence speaks in chorus? What do you call it when the truth you lived is louder than the lies they crafted? They are now trapped in the chaos of their own contradictions. Their attempts to reframe are not clever, they're clumsy. Legal jargon twisted in ways that only deepen suspicion. Timelines that fall apart under cross-examination. Emotional appeals that no longer land because their credibility has dissolved. The more they speak, the more they reinforce the narrative you held all along. Not one born from bitterness, but from discernment. You were never paranoid. You were early. You weren't unstable. You were awake. And now the world is catching up. Everything they tried to bury has risen like seeds under pressure. Emails, contracts, surveillance records, forgotten witness accounts. Layer by layer, they confirm what your spirit never let go of. Each piece of data, each whistleblower, each recovered file becomes a beam in the structure of your vindication. The justice being built now is not a favor, it's a restoration. Those who once rolled their eyes now lower their gaze. Some approach you quietly, apologizing with voices softened by shame. Others can't find words, but their presence, awkward, reverent, is an unspoken admission. You were right all along. What do they do now that the truth has outlived the gaslighting? What do you do with those who were silent when you were suffering? Can repentance coexist with memory? Can dignity survive delay? Your refusal to bend when it would have been easier to break was not just resistance, it was prophetic defiance, what social engineers call narrative coherence under coercion, the rare strength to maintain a truthful internal compass despite social, emotional, and institutional manipulation. You didn't just survive, you maintained accuracy, and that is what's rebuilding your reputation now. Not pity, but precision. As your vindication gathers momentum, doors once sealed shut creak open. Emails you were once excluded from now bear your name in the to field. Rooms that had whispered against you now invite your voice. The social infrastructure that once exiled you is being restructured, brick by brick, in your favor. Professional opportunities resurface. Partnerships that once dissolved begin to re-emerge. Recommendations, grants, proposals, resources that were once denied you begin circling back. Your name now carries weight, not because it was cleared, but because it endured. Not because others finally believed, but because heaven never stopped backing you. Nature reflects this reversal. The chameleon, when surrounded by hostile environments, doesn't merely hide. It absorbs, adapts, waits. But when conditions align, it returns to full vibrancy, revealing colors that were never lost, only protected. Like that, your true self is not a reinvention, it is a re-emergence. Erin Brockovich, once a single mother turned legal clerk with no formal law degree, was ridiculed and dismissed until her perseverance helped uncover one of the largest toxic contamination scandals in US history. Her vindication wasn't just legal, it was cultural. What once made her too much became what made her legendary. By contrast, Carlos Ghosn, once hailed as a business genius leading multiple automotive giants, orchestrated his own escape after being charged with massive financial misconduct. The higher his platform, the louder the crash. Today, he's a fugitive, living proof that corruption might buy time, but never peace. And Devon, a former intern at a consulting firm who noticed unusual vendor payments linked to the conspirators, quietly documented everything. While others were distracted by scandal's noise, he compiled a 36-page report. Evidence now central to an internal audit that validated your claims. He was not powerful, but he was prepared. What do you call someone who walks through hell and doesn't smell like smoke? What do you call someone who loses everything but never loses themselves? You are not just someone who suffered injustice. You are a living testimony. You are a prophetic disruption. You are the evidence that endurance is holy. And as your name is restored, Isaiah 61:7 becomes your reality. Instead of your shame, you will receive a double portion, and instead of disgrace, you will rejoice in your inheritance. The community begins to awaken. What started as whispered disbelief becomes public outrage. The lies they once applauded are now seen for what they were, performances, not character. Shock spreads like electricity through the circuits of social networks. The energy shifts, the system trembles, and the veil that once blinded the masses is torn, not by force, but by truth. The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. Proverbs 12:22. The world is beginning to delight in your trustworthiness now, not because you're trying to prove it, but because your life has already proved it. What do people do when the image they worshipped is exposed as false? How does a community rebuild when its heroes were villains and its outcast was right? What happens when the one they ignored becomes the voice they now need? How many apologies can mend the harm caused by silence? Those who once publicly aligned themselves with your ex, those drawn in by the charm, the curated empathy, the weaponized vulnerability, now back away in visible discomfort. Their brunches are no longer posted. Their smiles don't reach their eyes. Your ex's name becomes difficult to say without shame. They may still attempt control, But the community has disengaged from the spell. Colleagues of the disgraced lawyer begin to examine their memories under a new lens. That sarcastic joke in the meeting, that redacted memo, that deal they pushed too hard for, what once seemed clever now feels complicit. Respect has turned into careful distance. And the corrupt officer? People who once praised their firmness now wonder what they missed. Parents whisper about old cases. Local press publishes investigations. Past victims begin to re-emerge. Their badge no longer signifies authority. It signifies betrayal. Organizations that once blacklisted you issue careful statements. We acknowledge the new findings. We were unaware of the full extent. Their words are filtered through public relations departments, but their tone has changed. Professional references reappear, glowing, generous. Invitations arrive from the very circles that once cut you off without warning. What kind of reversal causes the same doors that slammed shut to now open with urgency? What kind of vindication causes shame to switch sides? What do you call it when the accused becomes the advisor, when the silenced becomes the standard? The entire social infrastructure that once reinforced your exile is now collapsing on itself, not through revenge, but through recalibration. Truth is reconfiguring the community's architecture. Out of nowhere, support emerges. Donations, legal aid, public endorsements, and most miraculous of all, belief, real belief. Belief not because it's trending, but because it's true. People you never expected now speak loudly in your defense. Their voices are uncoached. Their tone is righteous. Individuals who had endured similar betrayals but lacked the strength or platform now rise from the shadows. They say your name with reverence because it gave them courage to say their own. Brandon, a former university researcher who was ostracized for speaking out about academic fraud, sees your story and contacts your legal team. His case, dismissed years ago, has evidence that overlaps yours. His courage reignites. He volunteers data, timeline maps, a complete archive. Your victory becomes his reawakening. Just like Monica Lewinsky, once the target of global ridicule and character assassination, whose story was hijacked by power structures and political agendas. For decades she was silenced and shamed, but she reclaimed her voice, not with bitterness, but with purpose. Her TED Talk on public shaming and digital justice has inspired millions. What was once used to destroy her has become her platform to restore dignity for herself and countless others. By contrast, Harvey Weinstein, once one of Hollywood's most powerful producers, used his influence to silence, intimidate, and exploit. For years, he orchestrated settlements, PR campaigns, and insider protection. But truth caught up. In 2020, he was convicted of rape and sexual assault and sentenced to 23 years in prison. His empire collapsed. Awards rescinded. His name is now a cautionary tale. And every attempt to redefine his story has failed because justice didn't just visit him, it buried the lie he built. Meanwhile, professionals with skills, lawyers, therapists, forensic experts, start offering their services, not for profit, but because your resilience reawakened their own sense of purpose. Some say nothing at all. They simply show up, do the work, and disappear again. That's what righteousness attracts, quiet power. Nature mirrors this resurrection. The mycelium network beneath a forest, an underground web of communication between trees, redirects nutrients toward the ones under attack. Trees long thought isolated begin receiving unexpected aid through hidden roots. So it is with you. Connection is returning. Support is flowing from unseen places. You were never alone. You were just ahead. What kind of justice rearranges an entire ecosystem to restore one person? What kind of God waits until the mocking stops to begin the miracle? What happens when your scars become maps for others to find their way? You're not just being reaccepted. You're being restored. And as the tide turns fully in your favor, you step into the reality of Psalm 126, 5-6. Those who sow in tears shall reap with shouts of joy. He who goes out weeping shall come home with shouts of joy, bringing his sheaves with him. This is your return, not in pieces, but in glory, not as a cautionary tale, but as a catalyst. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. 1 Samuel 2:8. That verse has now become the lens through which your story is interpreted. No longer the discarded, no longer the silenced. You are now the reference point, the standard for what happens when truth survives the fire. And the fire you walk through is now reshaping not only your life, but the architecture of trust in the community. People watch with awakened eyes. They speak with deeper caution. They now understand that power can manipulate, that charm can deceive, that systems are not always righteous, and that silence, if left unchecked, can be violence in disguise. What if your story was the catalyst the community didn't know it needed? What if the suffering you endured is now building immune systems against future corruption? What happens when your life becomes a shield for others? Your experience, once treated as a scandal to avoid, is now seen as a blueprint of vigilance. Parents teach their children discernment. Co-workers double-check policies. Social circles, once ruled by image, now crave integrity. And the legal system that once failed you, it moves now with intensity, like it has something to prove. Attorneys not only accept your case, they defend it with conviction. They see it not just as litigation, but as restitution. Judges prioritize it, aware that its resolution will echo far beyond the courtroom. The same legal mechanisms that once worked against you are now being activated for your full redemption. Financial assets that were hidden or withheld are returned with penalties, not apologies. Property once stripped from you is restored with interest and public acknowledgement. Doors that were slammed shut now open on their own, as if recognizing the delay was never just procedural, it was spiritual theft. Opportunities you once had to mourn are now revisited. Scholarships, partnerships, professional pathways you were forced to surrender are brought back to the table, not as charity, but as justice. What kind of reversal pays back time and respect? How do you quantify restoration when it goes beyond the material? What is the value of dignity returned? How many careers are rebuilt on the truth someone else tried to bury? Brittany Griner, once detained under false pretenses in a foreign land, became a symbol of resilience and international advocacy. Her name, once the center of political chess, is now attached to courage, endurance, and the unshakable resolve of reclaiming what was taken. Her return was not just personal, it was prophetic. It shifted conversations about injustice, visibility, and worth. In contrast, Elizabeth Holmes, once celebrated as a genius innovator, manipulated trust at the highest levels. But the system she used to climb was the same one that ultimately exposed her. Sentenced to over 11 years in prison, her story is now a warning. Charisma without truth is a slow collapse disguised as brilliance. And then there's Lena, a local archivist who had access to hidden property records that had been quietly transferred out of your name. For years, she didn't know the full story, just that something felt wrong. When your truth came to light, she checked again. What she found completed the paper trail. Her testimony reopened a key land dispute and returned what was rightfully yours. New allies rise, not out of sympathy, but reverence. People who see the wisdom you carry because you've walked through hell without losing your light. They are not impressed by your pain. They are transformed by your perseverance. And they come not to save you, but to stand beside you. The fire-dependent lodgepole pine releases its seeds only through intense heat. Without fire, it cannot multiply. Without being scorched, it cannot grow. You are the same. The trauma didn't end you. It activated the future you didn't even know was coded into your spirit. What if the loneliness was training? What if the betrayal was pruning? What if you were never losing, only being refined? What if your story was never about revenge, but about legacy? And now, with everything returned and more, Isaiah 54:17 rings like a decree over your name. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. You didn't just survive the accusation, you outlived the accusers. You didn't just clear your name, you changed the standard. You didn't just win, you became the reason others will never lose. Throughout this entire ordeal, something greater than law, louder than evidence and deeper than logic was at work. What others called coincidence, you now recognize as orchestration. Moments that looked random, an email unsent, a document misplaced, a stranger arriving with just the right question, were not accidents. They were divine intersections. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Psalm 34 verse 7. And truly, those encampments were real, even if invisible to those who trafficked only in earthly power. They underestimated not just you, but the presence that backed you. What if every closed door was timed to prevent sabotage? What if the delay was designed to reveal what would have remained hidden had justice arrived too early? What if the pain was permission for heaven to intervene in a way that would leave no doubt? Your adversaries built their entire strategy on what they could see: money, influence, legal reach, media manipulation. But they never accounted for the unseen realm, the space where God whispers, where purpose overrides protocol, where timing is guided by revelation, not routine. Their attacks activated a spiritual kinetic field around you. What they sent to wound you became waves of transformation. Every attempt to erase you embedded your truth deeper into the record. Every weapon they formed forged your discernment. Every social exile expanded your spiritual territory. They meant to scatter you, but their shaking forced your roots deeper into the soil of the sacred. What kind of power mistakes silence for weakness? What arrogance believes it can rewrite a destiny written before time began? How many trials must one soul endure before others recognize divine anointing is not optional, it's inherited? How does one explain a justice that operates in dreams, whispers, and alignments no human hand could schedule? What if every insult was anointing in disguise? What happens when what they use to discredit you becomes the evidence that heaven endorsed you all along? The universal law of opposition played out with mathematical elegance. Like Newton's third law, every action they took against you generated an equal and opposite response in your favor. What they thought was fragmentation was actually recalibration. Their sabotage became your sanctuary. You would not have chosen this road, but now you know. The fire didn't consume you, it consecrated you. This wasn't just vindication, this was initiation. You were not just tested, you were tempered. And now the gifts you carry cannot be explained, only embodied. The wisdom isn't written in journals, it's written in scars. And those scars, they shine. Clarissa, a former litigation analyst who once quietly observed the attacks but said nothing, now stands beside you, not with excuses, but with action. She's organized a coalition of professionals using your case as precedent to change institutional practices. Her silence became strategy, and now her loyalty speaks louder than applause. In contrast, Bernard Madoff, the infamous architect of one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history, manipulated trust on a grand scale. His web of illusion was sophisticated, but fragile. When it collapsed, he lost not only fortune, but legacy. Dying in prison, he left behind a trail of shattered families and irredeemable guilt. Power without ethics always devours itself. Meanwhile, Mahalia, a widowed schoolteacher who watched your story unfold quietly from afar, sends a handwritten letter. She'd once believed the lies, but now she includes a check, small but sacrificial, and a note that says, "I see now, and I honor your courage." Her repentance births renewal. Your truth has restored more than reputation. It has redeemed hearts. Even the natural world confirms what's happened. The volcanic archipelago, a formation of islands born from pressure under oceans, does not rise in peace. It is shaped in fire, quakes, resistance, and yet it becomes new land, new structure. That's you, what once shook you, raised you. And now, as this long chapter of Revelation closes, it becomes clear. This was never just about justice. It was about formation, reformation, resurrection. You now walk not with answers, but with instincts, not just healed, but honed. You no longer question the truth. You embody it. The allies that now surround you were not found. They were revealed, refined, filtered through fire. Their loyalty is not loud. It's proven. The relationships now standing beside you were not built on proximity, but on principle. Gone are the days of keeping peace at the cost of clarity. Gone are the handshakes wrapped in manipulation. Gone are the hollow congratulations from people who once prayed for your collapse. Now you are surrounded by covenant, not convenience. And as you rise, Zechariah 2:5 declares your new reality. "For I will be a wall of fire around her, declares the Lord, and I will be the glory in her midst." You held your truth like a torch in a windstorm, refusing to let the flame die. Now, that very torch illuminates the path not just for you, but for a generation watching from the shadows. The spiritual strength forged through betrayal, mockery, and isolation is no longer just endurance. It is your unshakable foundation, a base more stable than stone, more refined than gold. You've become a structure that survived the quake, and now every beam of your being radiates divine resilience. How many times did you question your sanity while standing alone? How often did you second-guess your instincts when others mocked your discernment? And yet, every time you chose truth over comfort, you honed a weapon sharper than any sword, your spiritual intuition. What once felt like hypersensitivity now becomes a calibrated instrument of insight. As you enter this new terrain, you don't just feel relieved, you feel magnetized. The energy fields around you are no longer distorted, they're echoing your internal alignment. In physics, resonance occurs when a system vibrates at its natural frequency. That's what's happening now. You're vibrating in truth, and the universe has synchronized to your signal. But what exactly is this sensation of doors unlocking, of paths parting like the Red Sea before Moses? Exodus 14:21. Why do things once immovable now dissolve in your presence? How do opportunities find you without effort? It's not magic. It's order, restored. It's the cosmic mechanism clicking back into place after years of misalignment. What you're witnessing is not just your personal redemption, it's systemic realignment. This is what happens when heaven corrects error through one willing vessel. Your exposure of the lie wasn't a local event. It triggered seismic shifts in spiritual geography. Others feel it, even if they can't name the source. Some wake in the middle of the night, compelled to confess. Others abandon long-held falsehoods, unable to bear the weight of dissonance. And many who once served the lie now seek the light. Why? Because you broke the spell. Because your courage created a blueprint, a spiritual architecture for others to escape manipulation. The psalmist declared, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 34:18. And now he uses those very crushed pieces to build monuments of awakening. You were crushed, but you weren't destroyed. You were buried, but now you bloom. Jane Goodall, a world-renowned primatologist, once endured ridicule from the male-dominated scientific world. They called her naive, sentimental, unqualified. But her commitment to integrity over acceptance rewrote the way humans understand animals, and more importantly, themselves. Today, her methods are standard. Her voice became a global call to empathy. Like you, she refused to bow to conformity, and in doing so, she changed the entire field. In contrast, Rudy Giuliani, once hailed as America's mayor after 9/11, spiraled into disgrace through repeated public deception and participation in efforts to overturn democratic processes. Once honored with awards and respect, he became entangled in lawsuits, disbarment hearings, and mounting evidence of unethical behavior. His credibility crumbled under the weight of his own contradictions. What began as legacy became liability. His fall wasn't immediate. It was cumulative, proving that when someone trades truth for influence, time itself becomes a witness against them. And then there's Aaron, a quiet IT technician at a private firm. For years, he noticed his manager rerouting funds from employee retirement accounts. No one listened. HR dismissed him until he exposed it, anonymously. The ripple wasn't just financial, it restored trust to an entire company. Aaron never spoke publicly, but his refusal to enable corruption saved futures. Nature models this return to equilibrium. The axolotl, a rare amphibian, can regenerate entire limbs without scarring. It doesn't just survive damage, it reclaims design. That's you now, not just recovering, but regenerating, without bitterness, without spiritual scar tissue. Could it be that your entire journey was divinely encoded for this hour? Were you always meant to awaken those trapped in denial? How many others were watching in silence, waiting to see if truth could actually survive exposure? What if your pain was never punishment, but positioning? What if your life became the calibration for a generation's moral compass? What if your endurance wasn't just survival, but sacred leadership? Luke 21:13 declares, "And it will turn out for you as an occasion for testimony." That's what this moment is. An unfolding testimony, not a speech, a vibration, a transmission, a spiritual chain reaction. You didn't just survive corruption, you converted it into a code of truth. And now, every boundary you fought for becomes a sacred fence for someone else's protection. Every silence you broke becomes an invitation for others to speak. The laws of heaven are reactivating through your story. This wasn't just your vindication. It was the universe witnessing its own laws reassert themselves through your breath, your choices, your stand. This wasn't a lucky break. This was divine math, perfectly timed, cosmically orchestrated, unarguably holy. Now that the dust has settled and the shadows have scattered, you can finally exhale, not in defeat, but in holy vindication. What they buried was not your truth, but their own impending collapse. What they concealed was not your weakness, but your divine strength waiting to rise. Every hidden document, every forged statement, every whisper in dark corridors has been dragged into the light, not by your striving, but by heaven's timetable. You didn't need to beg for justice. Justice found you. You didn't need to scream to be heard. The silence of your obedience echoed louder than their lies. And now, with the whole world watching, you stand not as a victim of a crooked system, but as a witness of divine reversal. This wasn't just your personal breakthrough, it was a prophetic pattern being unveiled in the earth. What was once covered up is being uncovered. What was twisted is being straightened. And what was meant to destroy you has become the testimony that heaven is still writing through your life. As Isaiah 54:17 declares, "No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn." So now step forward, not as someone coming out of a fight, but as someone who has already won. The scars you carry are not marks of shame, they are seals of survival. Your enemies orchestrated a spectacle, but God turned it into a stage. You became living proof that resurrection is possible even when the grave is still warm. If this message resonated with you, if it confirmed something in your spirit, or gave language to the silent war you've endured, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to know they are not alone. Your story has power. Comment 777 below if you're ready to step fully into your comeback story. Or share your journey in the comments. We read every word, and we stand in prayer with you. To those who've supported us through super thanks donations, or even just a heartfelt prayer, we see you, we feel your love, and we are deeply grateful. Every offering, every share, every kind word fuels this mission to awaken, to restore, and to set captives free. Whether it's a seed, a share, or a silent amen whispered under your breath, you are part of this divine movement. Don't stop here. Watch our next video for a prophetic insight into the signs that confirm you were chosen before the foundations of the world were laid. There's more ahead, and it's glorious. Until then, may your name be mentioned in rooms you've never entered. May your truth echo louder than every lie spoken against you. May angels go before you to prepare what no man can block. And may peace, divine justice, and restoration wrap around you like a shield of fire. Blessings upon blessings to all the radiant souls watching. We love you. We see you. We honor your journey. See you in the next chapter.